Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Brands from Mount Vernon PD in Illinois. He has almost 23 years experience in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Chief Brands. Thank you for being here.
Hello, I'm glad to be here. Glad for the invitation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your time. I was going through your bio and there was something that stuck out that I wanted to start with. So you said that you believe in setting high standards for yourself and for others. Can you talk a little bit about that and why that's something that's important to you?
We always need to be self-improving ourselves every day. If we're not, then we're not moving forward. We're just staying stagnant. So I expect others to do well around me if I'm going to lead an organization. Well, I have to be improving myself. If I expect others to improve, but I don't do anything to myself, then I'm being very hypocritical. And what am I doing to help them if I'm not improving myself? So I believe in improving your knowledge, your health, every aspect every day. Now, we're not perfect. We're all humans. We make mistakes. I understand that. But to me, it's about how you recover from that mistake and what you do after that to improve yourself. So if people see me around me trying to improve myself every day, even though I'm not, I'm never going to be perfect, but they see that I'm, moving forward every day as best as I can, then I would hope that would help others to move forward as well, and whatever it may be.
Yeah. Have you heard of the 1% rule?
I believe I have. I hear lots of things, so it kind of probably gets muddled with all the things. But I believe I know what you're talking about. But it's been a while since I've researched or talked about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just this idea of like, how can we try to be 1% better every day?
Yeah.
I think so often we get overwhelmed with everything that's going on. Yeah. And to your point, we are all human, and it's so dynamic to be a human, and we all have different life experiences. We have different home life realities, work life realities, and I think when we start talking about improvement and, adding more to the plate, it can become overwhelming. And so how can we just try to improve ourselves a little bit each day? And how can we create consistency and habits that can compound over time? And I used to say, I've actually, maybe you'll think this is funny or maybe not, I don't know, but I've been told that my standards are sometimes too high. And I've had to kind of sit with that a little bit. And I've had to ask myself that question, are my standards for myself too high? Am I setting unrealistic standards for other people that are unachievable? And I think as I've sat with that, maybe a little bit of yes and no. Maybe sometimes there are some things that I really want to happen, or maybe I expect to happen and they don't. And maybe that's because I've set that bar too high. But I think that I agree with you. I think that we should always be setting the bar high enough where, and sometimes even higher than you think, so that you shock yourself when you achieve it. Shouldn't we always be trying to be the best versions of ourselves? And I think to your point, you said stagnation, right? That being stagnant, we're never going to find growth if we're complacent, if we're stagnant. And I think that growth is something that's always happening no matter what. We can't control it. We're all getting older. We're all changing every day. I have more gray hairs now than I ever have in my whole life. And, we can't stop change. So how can we try to make sure that the change is productive and positive change?
Yeah, to your point, I agree. There can be such a high standard you set for yourself that it's unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
So the important thing is, it's not necessarily a metric to measure, but challenging yourself. If you're not challenging yourself or doing something that's challenging, then you're probably not growing. So yeah, I agree that you shouldn't set a bar so high that it makes you very unhappy because you're never reaching that goal. It needs to be an attainable goal, but it needs to be challenging. It doesn't need to be something super easy. Now, there may be a tough day where you just don't feel like it, but as long as you're overall moving forward, so we're going to take a couple steps back every now and then, but as long as you're striving to move forward and meeting that new challenge, then then you're doing better.
I agree. Yeah. And I like that you said that sometimes we can't measure our success on the day to day. Sometimes we have to zoom out and we have to understand over maybe a longer period of time, what is our trajectory looking like? And I think that these things can be very, very simple. Like I talk to a lot of people about, how do we create habit stacking, where you can implement things during times in which you're already doing things, like maybe we do something, that helps us to be better while we're driving to work. Maybe that's an audio book, maybe that's a podcast, maybe that's a breathing technique. What does that look like? Can we practice mindset training while we're in the shower? Are there opportunities throughout our day? Because of course, everyone's always going to say time. I don't have enough time to do these things or to add anything new. But I also think that we have to be deliberate with our time. And one of the things that I've noticed lately is how much time I actually spend on social media. And I'm not a big social media person at all. But your phone will tell you, if you go in it today, your phone will tell you how many minutes or hours you spent on social media. And so I have had a lot of thought lately of how can I be more effective with my time? And one of those things is deinstalling Instagram and using that time to further my education. Maybe that's reading a book, maybe that's spending more quality time with my family. What does that look like? And so I think that there are little ways that we can challenge ourselves and improve ourselves and step out of comfort zones, because a lot of what we do and we fall back on is comfort. It's what we're used to. We're used to maybe binge watching TV every night or being on social media or whatever that looks like. How can we step out of that comfort zone, and how can we create healthier habits for ourselves?
I have a couple of examples toward that. Yeah. For example, when I'd come into work and driving into work, I'd immediately start work driving in. And if I came across, some bad news or something like that, it would kind of set the tone for the rest of the day. And so now I've noticed I needed some more quiet time for my brain to just kind of relax and take things in and ponder on things. And so now I make it a priority for when I drive into work. It's just quiet time, just time for me to think and reflect and think what I'm going to do when I come in and have a positive attitude instead of already being bombarded with all kinds of work. And then another example on the physical side is a lot of times I can get stuck at this desk doing paperwork or interviews or different things like that. And if I find myself I'm going to be in the office a lot during the day, every time the hour chimes, I'll spend a couple minutes getting up out of my seat, do 10 air squats or do some push-ups or planks or something just to get my blood flowing, so I'm not just stagnant all day long. And just little things like that can make a big difference.
Yeah, that's really smart. I'm a really big fan of creating reminders or calendar invites for things. So I love that for you. You've trained yourself, because it's training, right? Like you have to consistently do things for a period of time for that to become normal. And for you, every time that clock hits the hour, you're like, all right, non-negotiable. I'm getting up and I'm doing something. Maybe it's not a perfect system. Maybe you're in the middle of an interview and that happens. So maybe you do it after the interview. But the point is how can we make things more consistent, and how can we create habits that are based on dedication, not motivation? Because motivation is fleeting. We're hardly ever going to feel motivated, but I love that because I also sit at my desk a lot and I have to remind myself to go outside, feel the sun on you, move a little bit, breathe a little bit. And so for you to say non-negotiable every hour, I try my best to do that, I think is a really good thing that most people can do.
There's a study out there that shows that if you're stagnant all day at a desk at work, but you work out 30 minutes to an hour every day, it's not enough to overcome you being sitting still for all the day. So they recommend every hour just doing a little something just to get your heart flowing a little bit, and that can help overcome quite a bit. So
yeah, I like that a lot. I saw a statistic that said that sitting for more than, I think it was extended periods of time, but I think they were saying more than 8 hours a day, which a lot of us, if you work a desk job, a lot of us are sitting for an 8-hour shift, or maybe all in all 7 hours, but then you have your drive home and then you go home and you sit on your couch or whatever that is. So sitting for 8 or more hours in a day increases your chance of cardiac arrest by 400%. It was something crazy. So they're comparing sitting to smoking. They're like, sitting is worse than smoking. And so I think that's a really, really good reminder, because I think a lot of us sit, and a lot of the people who listen to our podcast are also chiefs. And so they understand, what it's like to be behind the desk all day.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
My question for you is, in the context of wellness, how do we train people to have those standards for themselves and to create those habits? And how do we encourage them to take care of themselves? Because that is the number one thing that, we always talk about is buy-in and engagement and getting people to care about their own wellness. What sort of conversations are you having, or is there any sort of training that you think could be implemented so that people see the importance of taking care of themselves?
I think training and education is important, but ultimately that person has to decide for themselves to listen to that and to implement that. And it's important that they, are educated on what could happen if they don't take that action and help themselves. But I don't know what the best motivator is. For me, I've always been in okay shape, good shape, better shape at different times of my life. Mm-hmm. I've always tried to take care of myself, but there was a few years where I wasn't taking the greatest care of myself, and it basically took me realizing that, wow, if I keep going down this path, it's not going to be good. I took a A1C test for diabetes just out of curiosity, because I have a family history of that. And while I didn't think I was going to be bad, I did show borderline pre-diabetic. I wasn't quite there yet, but I was like, wow, I need to start doing something now and not later. And so I started being more physical again. That's when I started doing stuff here in the office, every hour, and started eating better, because it's very easy to just eat bad. It's much easier to eat horrible than it is to eat good. And I had my A1C test again after I implemented a lot of that stuff, and it dropped numerous points.
Nice.
So sometimes it takes, unfortunately, a scary event or something in their life to give them a wake-up call. Because I know when you're in your 20s, you think you're invincible. I'll be fine. And a lot of times, unfortunately, it's not until, in your 30s, 40s, or even later that you realize that. And sometimes it's not too late, but you're behind the 8 ball. You're not where you need to be. I think it's having a culture of that so that they develop that, they adopt that. I remember when I first started in law enforcement, there's a lot of overweight officers, deputies, different people that I worked with that smoked a lot and were overweight, ate horrible, and it wasn't a good culture. And I can gladly say now that in my department, everybody's a healthy weight. Everybody looks great. And that doesn't mean that they're doing everything they need to be, but they're not morbidly obese like we've had in the past. So I think when they see that everybody around them is taking care of themselves and working out, eating right, it's a big influencer. It's a little bit of peer pressure. You don't want them to have the wrong types of peer pressure, but there is good, healthy peer pressure that you can, have at your department. And that's eating right when you can, and being fit and in the gym, because this job has high stress, extremely high stress. And if you're already out of shape or not taking care of yourself, that stress is just going to compound even worse. So you're not going to be able to handle that stress as well as if you're working out. Because I notice when I take a run, I feel so much better afterwards, especially if I had a very stressful day and I go for a run. It clears my head, my stress, levels go down, my cortisol goes down. It makes a tremendous difference. Whereas if I just sat on the couch and started eating potato chips, That is one of my stress relievers is food, but I've
Mhm.
learned that that's not the best stress reliever to have. So, because it just makes things worse in the long run.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're spot on. So I had a very similar experience with my wellness, and I was pretty much the poster child of everything not to do when it comes to wellness when I was younger. And there was a bit of invincibility that came with that, being young and being like, I'm good. Like nothing can, affect me. And I was the person that was eating fast food with every single meal. I was the person who was smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. Like I was drinking in excess. Like I was definitely, like I said, not the role model for wellness. And I had a moment, I had a crossroads moment, where I woke up and I was like, wow, like I have two options right now. Like I can continue going down this path. And both of my parents were drug addicts. Like worst fear was ending up like them. They did not walk a good path. My dad was incarcerated for 6 years. Like there was a lot going on in my childhood. And so I always gauged my success kind of by that measurement of like, as long as I don't end up like my parents, I'm good. And so I had this moment where I was like, wow, like I'm going down a bad path here, and if I keep going down this path, I'm going to end up just like my parents. And that was my biggest fear. And then the other option was to start prioritizing, my personal health and wellness. And so I do think that sometimes it does take that for people to have like a wake up call and be like, wow, okay, like now I got to start, working on it. My hope is that we can share those wake up calls with other people and they can start being more proactive in their own, health and wellness. And this can be something that's just normal, just like going to the dentist or, twice a year, going to your doctor and doing blood work once a year. Like, how can we create systems and training and conversations that get the younger people to be like, yeah, like I don't want to reach that point. I don't want to reach a breaking point, or I don't want to wait until there's a major health issue or a major problem to then deal with it. And I always tell the younger people, I work with a lot of pre-academy, academy, and they're the perfect opportunity to get in front of them because they're very absorbent, like they are open-minded. They want the information. They're not like jaded or, salty yet, so like, how do we get in front of them when they're like bright eyed, and bushy tailed? But I tell them, I'm like, it is so much easier to stay fit than to get fit. And right now, especially when they go through the academy, for a lot of them, that's the most fit they're going to be in their entire lives, so how do we maintain that? How do we keep that momentum going? And how do we encourage them to make these non-negotiable day-to-day habits so that they don't end up, down the road with a ton of injuries? They don't, end up down the road with, a heart issue. What does that look like? So my hope is through these conversations, it'll educate and inspire them to make healthier decisions.
Yeah, I have tried to instill this into my daughter is that that's what parents are for. And that's what I feel like the chief here at the police department is learn from other people's mistakes. I don't want you to make the same mistakes that I made, and you will learn so much quicker. You will have such a smoother life if you don't go through those experiences that I went through or that somebody else went through. If you can learn from others' mistakes, you'll have a much better, much faster improvement in the things that you do. But sometimes people, they know those mistakes that were made, but they still have to make them themselves for some reason. They just have to experience, failure themselves. Everybody will, experience failure, but those that learn to learn from others first will succeed far faster and greater than the ones that have to make the mistakes themselves. So I've tried to instill that into my daughter. Like, we're doing this. We're disciplining you for this reason or whatever, because I've went through this before and I don't want you to go through the same experience. And we're not doing it to hurt you or to prevent you from experiencing something. We're actually trying to help you prevent hurt or disappointment or different things like that. And it's the same way I feel in law enforcement. As long as people are learning from other people's mistakes, or I'm teaching others, hey, don't do this because I did this. it's, even with the health, hey, I went down this path and it wasn't looking so good and I was out of shape and couldn't climb flight of stairs without being out of breath. And when used to, I could, run miles on end without any issue. So don't make the same mistakes I made.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think some people, when you say don't touch the hot stove, they have to touch the hot stove.
Yeah.
And I even think that people who do listen, who are like, okay, like I'll listen to you. I won't touch that hot stove. Like I'll learn from you and not make those same mistakes. They're still going to make their own mistakes, and that's okay too. But, how can we create an environment where we're open and willing to share with each other? And there's a little bit of vulnerability that comes with that, like I appreciate you sharing that with us on the podcast. That takes courage and vulnerability to be like, hey, like I noticed this, and my blood work kind of scared me a little bit. And like, this is how it, I started focusing on my wellness and, for me to share my background and, how do we create an environment where we all feel comfortable and safe enough to share these things so that the people who are willing to learn from it, they're set up for success, and the people who aren't, that's okay. They'll figure it out. Like they'll realize that stove's hot and they won't touch it again, so but my hope is that, because I truly believe that positivity, positive habits are infectious. They're going to spread, and the reverse is also true. But how can we get the majority of people to be talking about this? How can we get the majority of people to be, trying to improve themselves? Because I think that will rub off on everybody else. I've had moments in my life where I've tried really hard to, and I don't want to say like force, although if you talk to my fiance, he might say that like I try to control situations, like I, try to keep everything like in its box. But I've tried to, like in the past, be like, hey, like I think we should eat healthier, or I think we should do these things. And, my partner being like, no, I don't want to do that, kind of resistant to it. And I'm like trying to get them to do something. And then I realized that by me just leading by example, by me just being like, okay, do your thing. If you're not receptive to that, that's okay. I'm going to take care of me. And then eventually that person sees it and they're like, oh, I want that too. So how can we get the majority of people setting that example, leading by example, and then hopefully those other people will fall, in line later and follow in their direction.
I found that exact same example. I wanted to change some things that I was doing in my life, and I'd never asked my wife to join or anything like that. I would never pressure her into anything she doesn't want to do. But I started doing things on my own, and before too much longer, she's like, getting jealous that I'm losing a little bit of weight, getting in better shape. And for too long, she starts doing it. And now she's much more disciplined than I am, and has lost a tremendous amount of weight that I never asked her to lose or thought that she needed to lose. But I started it, but she's taken it leaps and bounds beyond me. She's much more disciplined than I am. And I kind of inspired her, and now she's an inspiration for me, because it's like, wow, you've really taken this far beyond where I thought I could go. So it just takes one person starting it, and I think it can influence many people after that, because I know my wife's influenced many others that have seen the journey that she's gone through. So, I mean, it can be a domino effect, really, and especially within a department. If you have that culture, and if you do that from the top down, they know that, I can do the 20 to 29-year-old physical fitness standard, that they then expect themselves to be able to do that. They don't want the older chief to be able to beat the 25-year-old in a test. That'd be kind of embarrassing. So it just puts a little bit of pressure, but also helps set the example.
Yeah, I love that story. I think that's great. I don't want to assume that your wife's a little bit competitive, but maybe she was like, she's like, I'm going to beat him in his own game. I love that story.
He's done well. I'm very well.
What do you think is still maybe the biggest challenge with law enforcement wellness as a whole?
I think getting help when they need it. We're seeing that. I also think that we tend to still self-medicate in a way, either with alcohol, food. And, it doesn't even, have to be medication. Like I said, food can be self-medicating. You just drown your stress in eating or drinking, unhealthy activities. I think we have still negative ways of handling stress and not the proper channels to handle stress. And I think we've done a much better job in the past 20 years from when I started, but I think we still have a long ways to go. We can handle stress much better when we're mentally and physically healthy. So I think we're doing the right things. I think it's just unfortunately going to takes time to change a whole culture. It takes time and influence, and I think we're on the right track. I just hope it comes sooner than later, but I think we're definitely taking the right steps.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've seen a lot of progress in the last 8-9 years that I've been in this space. And I think we'll continue to see progress, and to your point, yeah, it's a slow ship to turn. It's not going to flip around 180 overnight, but we're getting there. And I think to your point of what you said earlier, can we zoom out and see the trajectory? Because maybe today it doesn't feel like there's a ton of progress because it's moving slowly. But when we zoom out and we see even over the last 5 years, we're seeing an upward trajectory when it comes to wellness. One of the things that I wanted to kind of touch on that you just said was stress. And we know that stress leads to everything, really, a lot of things, right? Like when we look at cardiovascular health, when we look at sleep, when we look at nutrition, stress is a huge component as to why people aren't sleeping as well as they could, why people aren't eating as well as they should. We see stats, and I don't know if you've seen this where you are, but we used to see stats that showed that suicide was the number one reason for death in law enforcement. Now we're seeing stats that say cardiovascular health. So cardiac arrest is one of the main reasons, right? And stress and nutrition play a role into your heart health, sitting, right? Not moving your body. So physical fitness is also going to play a role. But if you're not eating well and you're stressed and you're not moving, it's going to take a toll on your heart. And so we're seeing these things. And so now the conversation is, how do we, put in place resources that can help to reduce the risk or reduce those statistics, and one of the things that, we talked about before was, kind of diving into some of these sections of wellness and trying to identify, okay, what are the resources and how can we have more action-based conversations or solution-based conversations to help? And so the first thing I kind of want to dive into a little bit is sleep. What are you seeing with sleep? Are you seeing that it's shift work, it's managing families? Like, why are people not sleeping as much, and what do you think is impacting it?
I think it's numerous things that impact it, and sleep is extremely important because there are studies that show that people who aren't sleeping well or have insomnia or very short sleep periods have a much higher risk of suicide and mental health. And sleep can be attributed to quite a bit of those things. And we have to remember that, if we sleep 7 to 8 hours a night, which is a good sleep, that's a third of our life. A third of our life. So a third of our life can affect the 2/3 that we're awake. And if we're not spending the time that we need to in that third of our life, the rest of that 2/3 is going to suffer from that. So, for example, I'm a big believer in spending decent amount of money on bed and pillow and your environment that you sleep in, because like I said, the third of your life that you're sleeping affects your other 2/3 where you're active and you're doing things. And, making sure that your environment that you sleep in is conducive for sleep. So it's dark, it's cool. I sleep with 65-degree temperatures. Studies have shown that the cooler your room is, the better you're going to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't darken your windows, sleep with a sleep mask or different things like that. Find what makes you sleep the best and do that. And other things, I don't get on my phone an hour to 2 hours before I go to bed. I don't watch the news. I don't do anything that's going to raise my stress levels or raise my blood pressure because I saw something bad on the news and now that's all I'm thinking about. I'm not going to go to sleep after that. So I try to do things to wind down before I go to bed. And your body and your mind are very much creatures of routine. So if you do the exact same routine, your body's going to know, oh, we're going to sleep. So it prepares itself, where if you're just getting home, you throw the keys on the counter and then you go straight and try to go to sleep, it's probably not going to work. So setting routines and trying to be as routine as you can right before you go to bed. And one good advice that I received, and I think it works really well, is if you are a shift worker, or you are on midnights, which I have been, especially on 12-hour shifts, is very difficult. Is on your days off, a lot of times officers that have families, they try to be awake during the normal hours that on the days that they're off to be with their family and be normal. But that really messes up your sleep schedule. So what I would try to do is, for example, if I'm working 6 p to 6 a, and I get off at 6 o'clock in the morning and I go home and I go to sleep, but on my days off, I want to be normal. I want to be up during the day and sleep at night. Well, I would at least stay up to 1 or 2 o'clock at night on my days off. And I would sleep till 9 to 10 o'clock in the morning. So that way, every single day, whether I was working or whether I was off, I was asleep from 6 a.m. to 9 or 10 a.m. So that 3 or 4 hours, my body knows I'm always going to be asleep. And then from, midnight to 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, or just during that day, my body knows I'm always going to be awake. So if you're going back and forth and your body never knows when it's normal time to sleep, when it's normal time to be awake, it causes a lot of issues. So I found, even when I was on midnights, not that it's ever the greatest sleep, no matter what you do, having that time from 6 a.m. to 9 or 10 a.m., always asleep, really helped my body, regardless of being on midnights. So having repeating time, like I said, your body is a body of habit. So it likes a little bit of structure. So the more structure you can give it with sleep, the better.
I loved that statement that your mind and your body are both creatures of habit or structure. I think it's so true. And I love that you talked about tactical things for kind of a sleep routine, or sleep hygiene is what they call it. Right. And so I agree with you. There are so many things that you can do and you don't have to do them all. Right. And like I always tell people, like, start with one thing and then we can build on that. What is one thing you can commit to? Can you turn your phone off an hour or two, like turn all devices off an hour or two before you go to bed? Do that for a while, a couple months, like get in the habit of that. Then can we add something else? Maybe it's for a lot of people, taking a warm shower or bath before you go to bed helps to relax everything. I love the cool. I set mine at 68 and I have to have the fan on. So I agree, like colder is better. I have a love-hate with this, but my fiance blacks out our windows. So we have like blackout, like film that we put on the windows. So it's completely dark. I personally like waking up to the sun. I feel like I feel energized by that, but there are studies to show that blocking out the light is good, especially if you're sleeping during the day. Can we block out and create a darker environment? Stretching before you go to bed is good. A breathing technique before you go to bed. Maybe you journal. I know this sounds like so woo for some people, but it's called a brain dump. And it's not like a woo woo thing. It's, all you do is everything you're thinking about from the day. If it's a call you were on, an argument you had with a spouse. Maybe it was that thing you saw on the news earlier that you're thinking about. Can you just write all of that down into like a notebook? It doesn't have to be structured. Just like write everything you're thinking about down, and then train your brain that when you close that notebook, you no longer have to think about it for the rest of the night. Like there's so many things that we can do to help improve the quality of sleep. And I really appreciated that you said you may not be able to necessarily control the length of sleep, especially in your line of work. Really difficult, to tell someone, hey, on your days off, don't go to your kids' soccer practice, when you want to, or hey, don't spend that time, that your wife or spouse wants you to spend with them, on your day off. Tough, right? There's also times where maybe you're on call or you have to go to court the next day. And, so if we can't control the length as much as maybe we would like to, and I actually really appreciated you saying, try to go to sleep at the same time every day. Because that's really effective. But if we can't control the length and you're like, okay, I have 4 or 5 hours that I know I can sleep each day, how can we improve the quality? Because if you only have 4 or 5 hours, but your mind is racing, you're thinking about stuff constantly, you're always waking up, you have insomnia, you're uncomfortable, and your quality of sleep is garbage, well, now you're only getting a couple hours of sleep, if that, so how can we put in place structure and habit to make sure that when you sleep that 4 or 5 hours, like you're out, and you wake up as rested as you can.
Yeah. Yeah. And we got to remember that when we sleep, our body is healing and repairing itself. So if it ever gets to do that, you're just going to be draining yourself more and more and wearing your body down more and more. And they've also found, I'm no expert in this, but I've done lots of research, and I know from my personal experience, and I've gotten to hear some awesome experts on it, is that it also helps tremendously with PTSD. If you can help those victims of PTSD that, cannot sleep well, if we can find them ways to sleep, it does numbers on helping them deal with their PTSD. And I believe, sleep's not the end all be all, but it's extremely important. It's one of those, I feel top 3 to 5 things that we have to take care of in order to be successful and healthy and all the things that we need to be.
Yeah. I had someone the other day tell me that sleep was overrated, and I think they said it as a joke. And I was like, I could not disagree more with you. I think that sleep should be top priority because then what is the compounding effect from that? To your point, we're adding more stress. You said mental health issues, suicide, these things stem from, not getting enough sleep. We know decision making and reaction time is impacted by sleep. So if you're wanting to make safe, effective decisions out on the streets, you have to have sleep. And then we see people who aren't getting enough sleep. What do? They have 3 energy drinks a day, with their pre-workout. And what does that do? That's putting even more strain on your heart. So it's this compounding thing that happens. So I really appreciate you sharing what you know. And I couldn't agree more. I think that sleep is so important, and it's something that maybe isn't talked about enough. I think we're starting to, but I just thought it was so funny. And I know they said it as a joke, but they're just like, sleep's overrated. And I was like, no, it's not. It's not at all. The other thing that you talked about a little bit earlier was nutrition. And you said it a couple times. You were like, in this line of work, it's easier to eat unhealthy than it is healthy. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the nutrition space, and what do you think we can do to start improving nutrition?
So, it seems that nobody wants to prepare a meal and bring it to work. I think it's just because we're lazy and don't want to put the time and effort into it. So, especially at least what I see in law enforcement is we are big on fast food. And while I understand, I eat fast food still. It's not like I'm perfect or anything like that. But when I do eat fast food, I try to order the least worst thing. For example, I'll try to order chicken if they have it, grilled chicken if they have it. And I try not to get fries. I try to get a salad. And I still try to drink water or tea and not soda. To me, soda is the easiest thing to cut out and probably one of the worst things for you.
Yeah.
So if you are going to eat fast food, at least eat the least worst thing, for example. And I think that does make a big difference. It's not the greatest thing that you can do, but it sure helps than eating a large fry that's just full of grease and salt. Just cutting out that one side item makes a big difference. It really does.
Yeah.
I think, if you can eat single source foods, I've been trying to do that as much, and that's really hard to do unless you're eating straight vegetables or meat or different things like that. But all these foods with all these added ingredients, the more added ingredients that's in them, the worse it is for you. So, the smaller the ingredients list, the better it's going to be. But I also only try to eat 8 hours a day. And then the 16 other hours, I try not to eat and fast that time. And I do intermittent fasting. And I notice a tremendous difference. I'm much more clear mentally, better energy, more focused, less stress when I do a 24-hour or 40-hour fast or however long of a fast I do. And it makes a tremendous difference. And so if, I try to do the best I can with food, but I know I'm not ever going to be perfect with the way that I eat, especially with my schedule and different things like that. If we're traveling, I travel to see my daughter. She's at a university a couple hours away. Obviously, when I'm traveling, it's kind of hard to pack food for a couple of days to eat right, different things like that when you're on the road. So I try to just do my best. It's funny because if you follow all the health guidelines and try to follow exactly to be the most healthiest person ever on what you eat or drink, there wouldn't hardly be anything that you would eat or drink because it touched plastic or it did this or it did that. My advice is just to do the absolute best you can and cut out the really, really bad stuff, fries, potato chips, the sweets and sugars. Sugar, you can live without sugar. You can go 100% without sugar and be perfectly fine. Sugar's not good for you at all. And we drink a lot of sugar when we're drinking sodas or these, energy drinks, which luckily in my life, I think I've took one sip of an energy drink and I've stayed away from them, thankfully. But I know a lot of people, including in my department, that basically live on them. And it scares me to death, honestly.
Yeah. I have my own approach and opinions to things, and I know that there's a sliding scale. There's some people who maybe think it's too strict and some people who think it's not strict enough, and so to your point, like everyone's going to have their kind of own gauge on where they want to be on that scale. I went to a first responder conference a couple years ago, and there was a gentleman there who was doing a keynote speaking presentation on nutrition. And in part of his presentation, he said, stop drinking coffee, basically. Like he was talking about caffeine. And you could feel like there was like an actual feeling in the air. You could feel how in that one moment he lost everybody, because most people drink some sort of caffeine, whether it's coffee, energy drinks, whatever that is. Do I agree that being over caffeinated is bad? Yeah. Of course, I think all of us can. We can all like sit here and logically say, okay, if you drink too much caffeine, it's probably not good for you. But I think that if our goal is to get people to take action, we can't have those barriers pop up. And for me, and this is my opinion, other people have different opinions, I try to meet people where they are so that there is that receptiveness. And I love what you said about swaps. I think swaps are really smart. So instead of saying, hey, don't drink that energy drink, it's like, hey, what if we swapped this energy drink for this energy drink? Because this one's maybe a little bit better or lower in sugar or whatever it looks like. Or maybe, hey, instead of doing 3, could we do 2?
Yeah.
And then eventually instead of 2, could we do 1? And I think that people are more on board when we have those types of conversations, than just being like, stop doing it. And then for fast food, same thing, hey, instead of the fried chicken sandwich, could you get a grilled chicken sandwich? Instead of the fries, can we do a salad? Instead of the sweet tea, can we do an unsweetened tea? What does that look like? So I think swaps are a really smart strategy. And the funny thing, or the interesting thing about humans, is that we are extremely adaptable. And so we don't understand like how crappy we feel until we have the opposite. And so the goal is that you actually start to feel better when you do these things, right? You like notice that when, you guys have Chick-fil-A where you are?
Near us, not in our town, but within 30 minutes away, yes.
But you understand like what it is, right? So it's like, okay, so you go to Chick-fil-A and you do the grilled chicken instead of the fried chicken. And then notice how you feel at the end of it. The idea is that after the grilled chicken, you feel like you have more energy, you're less lethargic, you don't feel like you want to take a nap midday. Maybe you had the salad instead of the fries, and now you don't feel like you're just completely depleted, and the hope is that when you feel better, then it makes you want to make more of those healthy choices. And then that compounds over time. But I think as soon as we like lose someone and they're like, don't tell me what to do, it's really hard to get past that.
Yeah.
But then there's other people out there, you find everything on social media, but there's a guy who's like a health nutrition guru, and he does this video series where he goes, okay, healthier options for McDonald's or something. And then it like pops and he's like, just kidding. And he goes, stop eating like an asshole. And he's like, go to the grocery store. Like that's his whole thing. He's like, go to the grocery store. Yeah. And so there are some people who are against that. They're like, no, don't eat the fast food, go to the grocery store. But my opinion is meet people where they are. And then maybe one day they'll want to go to the grocery store. But if they are completely resistant, how are we ever going to make any positive change?
Yeah, you can take anything to the extreme. Like even if you go to the grocery store, well, then this brand's worse than this brand, and this one's covered in plastic. Like it's almost never ending. As long as you start making steps toward that direction is what's important, and then maintain that is what I think is most important. Because like I said, you can take it to an extreme to where you're never going to get there. So kind of like what we were talking about earlier, you got to just be taking steps forward. You don't want to set a goal so high that you're never going to achieve it, or that you give up because you're not meeting little baby step goals. If you're always failing, you're probably just going to stop. So you got to have, goals that are achievable, and it makes you feel like you're moving forward. So it's the same way with this. I try to do what's common sense to me, and good for me. So what's good for me isn't always good for anybody else. But as long as you're making an effort to do better with what you're eating and putting into your body, then, over the long run, it will make a difference.
Yep, I agree. I know we're going to run short on time, so I just have one more question for you, and that's for the younger generation. What words of wisdom would you share with them that maybe you wish you would have known when you were first starting?
That you don't know everything. And the more you learn that you don't know. And even now, 23 years later, there's a tremendous amount I don't know, and I will continue to learn. So me growing up through this profession, I tried to get my hands on every responsibility I could get on, everything. And that's just me. I'm very driven. I wanted to learn. And I feel I got to this position because I was an extremely hard worker. I wanted to learn, and I put in the time and effort. And it wasn't because of political reasons or anything else. It's because I knew this department inside and out, and I wanted to know it. So I became a field training officer because I wanted to learn the job better myself. Not only, what better way to learn the job better yourself than when you're training somebody, because then that elevates you. You have to know what you're doing to teach them. So I would get to go through different scenarios again, or our field training manual, and be like, oh yeah, I forgot about that, and it made me better. And then I took over the field training program eventually, and then I basically did everything at our department except for narcotics and crime scene. And that's the only reason I'm here today, is because I was able to do that, because I'm not the most political person, or politically, it's very hard for me. I couldn't be a politician because I'm not the most suck up or, easygoing. I'm not real good at small talk, different things like that. It's because I put in the hard work, and people saw that, and they knew that I would put in the hard work here to make me better. So, like, I don't think I'm the best chief. I got a lot of work to do on myself in a lot of ways, and by doing putting in the work, hopefully I can become better every day for my men and women. And hopefully they see that and they give me grace for when I make mistakes, because I'm going to make mistakes or not make the best decision. But they know that, I'm human and that I will always strive to correct that and be better. And hopefully they can see that. And no, the younger generation, things aren't handed to you. You've really got to put in the time and effort for the things that you want to do. And I'm one of those that believe that you can do nearly everything, not everything, but nearly everything that you set your mind to, as long as you put in the hard work and effort and do what you need to do to get there. I really do believe that. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that, because, I didn't have the best background. And, a lot of people think it's a miracle that, I'm here today. I could have very easily went down the opposite path of law enforcement on the criminal side. I very easily could have done that and was on that path, honestly, as an early teenager. And, if it wasn't for me learning early consequences early on in my life and realizing, there's a consequence for bad actions and there's a consequence for good actions. I would rather have the consequences of my good actions than the bad actions, and just to put in that time and effort.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on here today. I really appreciate your time and sharing all of your knowledge in wellness and leadership. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Of course.